What if the breakfast you have trusted for years, the one your doctor approved, the one you prepare every single morning with the genuine belief that you are protecting your health, is the exact reason your blood sugar refuses to come down? And what if the specific foods that millions of people with diabetes have been told to eat for breakfast are creating the very metabolic conditions that make the disease progressively harder to manage? I am not talking about obvious junk food. I am talking about the bowl of oatmeal sitting on your counter right now, the whole wheat toast you chose specifically because the packaging said heart healthy, and the glass of fresh orange juice you drink because it is natural and full of vitamins. These are the foods I want to talk about today because the gap between how these foods are marketed and what they actually do to your blood sugar in the first 30 minutes after you eat them is one of the most consequential pieces of misinformation in modern nutrition. Here is what most people with diabetes have never been shown clearly. Your morning is the most metabolically vulnerable period of your entire day. The hormonal environment your body creates between 4 and 8 in the morning creates a situation where carbohydrate-containing foods produce a significantly more aggressive blood sugar response than the same foods eaten at noon or in the evening. And when you consistently eat a carbohydrate-heavy breakfast into that already elevated hormonal environment, you are not just spiking your blood sugar once. You are locking your metabolism into a state of chronic insulin elevation that makes fat burning physiologically impossible and drives progressive worsening of insulin resistance over months and years. My name is Dr. William Kim. I am a preventive medicine physician and longevity researcher with decades of clinical practice working with patients, managing type 2 diabetes and prediabetes. And one pattern I have observed with striking consistency across thousands of patients is this. The people who struggle most with their morning blood sugar numbers are frequently not making obvious dietary errors. They are following advice that was given in good faith, but built on an incomplete understanding of morning metabolic physiology. That incomplete understanding is what I'm going to correct today. I want to cover the science behind why breakfast is so consequential for blood sugar, specifically the physiological mechanism that causes elevated fasting glucose even after 8 hours without eating, and 3 specific breakfast strategies that keep your blood sugar stable, protect your pancreas, and work with your morning hormonal environment rather than against it. Let us get into it. Before we talk about what to eat, you need to understand what is happening inside your body every single morning before you take your first bite. Because without this understanding, the breakfast advice I'm about to give you will seem arbitrary. With it, it will make complete mechanistic sense. Around 4 to 5 in the morning, while you are still asleep, your brain sends signals to your adrenal glands to begin releasing cortisol and adrenaline. This is your biological wake-up system. These hormones have a specific instruction for your liver. Release glucose into the bloodstream, mobilize energy so this person can get up and function. Your liver obeys. It begins converting stored glycogen into glucose and releasing it into your blood. This is called the dawn phenomenon, and it is a normal ancestral survival mechanism. Your body is preloading fuel so you can start the day without crashing the moment you stand up. The practical consequence is that your blood sugar in the early morning hours is already elevated compared to your midnight levels, even though you have not eaten a single calorie. If you check your fasting glucose first thing in the morning and the number seems high despite eating nothing for 8 or 10 hours, this is why. Your liver produced that sugar. Your body is not broken. It is executing a normal physiological program. But here is where the critical mistake happens. Your blood sugar is already elevated from the dawn phenomenon. Your cortisol is at its peak for the day. Cortisol is an insulin antagonizing hormone, meaning it actively reduces the effectiveness of insulin at the cellular level. Your tissues are, at this specific moment in the morning, at their least insulin-sensitive point in the 24-hour cycle. And into this environment, most people with diabetes pour a bowl of oatmeal or 2 slices of whole wheat toast or a glass of orange juice. Let me be precise about what happens next. Whole wheat bread, despite its brown color and fiber-rich marketing, is primarily starch. Starch is glucose molecules linked together in long chains. The moment starch contacts saliva, an enzyme called amylase begins breaking those chains apart. By the time the food reaches your small intestine, those chains have been fully hydrolyzed into individual glucose molecules that absorb rapidly into your bloodstream. The speed at which this happens for bread, even whole wheat bread, is faster than most people realize. The glycemic index of whole wheat bread is not dramatically lower than white bread. The difference in how quickly it raises your blood sugar is relatively modest. Fresh orange juice is even more direct. When you squeeze oranges and remove the fiber and the pulp, you are left with concentrated fructose and glucose in liquid form. There is nothing to slow absorption, no fiber matrix, no cell wall structure to break down. The sugar enters your bloodstream within minutes, producing one of the fastest and most aggressive glucose spikes available from any food source. The fiber that would have moderated this response is sitting in your juicer. Instant oatmeal, particularly the flavored varieties, has been processed into fine flakes that digest almost as rapidly as flour. The beta-glucan fiber that makes steel-cut oats genuinely beneficial for blood sugar is still present in instant oatmeal, but in a physical form that is far less effective as a glucose barrier because the processing has disrupted the grain structure that makes the fiber work. So you wake up with already elevated blood sugar from the dawn phenomenon. Your cortisol is making your cells less responsive to insulin, and you consume a high glycemic breakfast that floods your bloodstream with glucose rapidly. Your pancreas detects a sharply rising blood sugar and releases a large insulin bolus in response. For a person without diabetes, this system manages the spike and recovery reasonably well. For a person with insulin resistance or compromised beta cell function, the spike goes higher and stays elevated longer. The pancreas works harder, releasing more insulin over a longer period to bring the glucose down. Eventually, the glucose does come down, but because the insulin release was large and prolonged, the glucose drops significantly. 2 hours after that healthy breakfast, you feel fatigued. Your concentration drops, you become irritable, you crave something sweet or caffeinated, you reach for a mid-morning snack, and the cycle repeats. This is not weak willpower. This is predictable physiology following an input that was never appropriate for your metabolic situation. And there is a longer-term consequence that is even more important. Chronically elevated post-meal insulin tells your body that energy is abundantly available and should be stored rather than burned. As long as insulin remains elevated, access to your fat stores is essentially locked. The hormonal signal for fat oxidation cannot be activated in the presence of high insulin. This is not a metaphor. It is a biochemical reality. Insulin suppresses the enzyme that releases fatty acids from fat cells for use as fuel. High breakfast insulin sets the hormonal tone for the entire morning and, in many cases, well into the afternoon. The goal of a metabolically intelligent breakfast for someone managing diabetes is specific, and it is the opposite of what standard breakfast advice produces. We want a breakfast that provides satiety and genuine nourishment, that produces minimal insulin response, that does not compound the dawn phenomenon glucose elevation, and that allows the body to maintain the mild fat-burning metabolic state that many people naturally approach after an overnight fast, rather than immediately shutting it down with a carbohydrate surge. 3 breakfast strategies accomplish this consistently and with strong biochemical logic behind each one. The first breakfast strategy is what I call the protein and fat foundation. The core of this breakfast is whole eggs and avocado. And I want to address the concern about cholesterol directly because it is the primary reason people avoid this combination despite its clear metabolic advantages for blood sugar management. The hypothesis that dietary cholesterol raises blood cholesterol and causes cardiovascular disease was dominant for several decades. It is not well supported by the current evidence. Large, well-designed prospective studies and meta-analyses have consistently found that dietary cholesterol from whole food sources like eggs has minimal effect on cardiovascular disease risk in most people. Your liver produces cholesterol endogenously and adjusts its own production in response to dietary intake through a feedback mechanism. When you eat more cholesterol from food, your liver produces less. The relationship is not the linear accumulation that early research suggested. What does meaningfully raise small, dense LDL, the lipoprotein fraction most associated with cardiovascular risk, is chronic consumption of refined carbohydrates and industrial trans fats, the very foods that make up the standard diabetic breakfast. The egg yolk specifically contains choline, essential for liver fat metabolism and brain function. It contains vitamin D, which is directly associated with improved insulin sensitivity at the cellular level. It contains lutein and zeaxanthin, which protect retinal tissue from the oxidative damage associated with chronically elevated blood sugar. And it contains a complete profile of fat-soluble vitamins in a bioavailable form. The yolk is nutritionally dense in ways that are directly relevant to the complications of diabetes. 2 to 3 whole eggs provide approximately 15 to 18 g of high-quality complete protein. Protein has a glycemic index of effectively 0 when eaten alone. It stimulates a modest insulin response that is far smaller than an equivalent caloric load of carbohydrates. And protein activates GLP-1 secretion from intestinal L cells, which slows gastric emptying and smooths glucose delivery into the bloodstream from any carbohydrate consumed alongside it. Avocado contributes monounsaturated fat, potassium, and soluble fiber in a combination that has no meaningful glycemic impact. The fat in avocado slows gastric emptying, extending the satiety signal and flattening any residual glucose response. The soluble fiber feeds beneficial gut bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids, improving insulin sensitivity. And the potassium supports healthy blood pressure, which is relevant for most people managing diabetes. Cook the eggs in a stable fat such as butter, ghee, or coconut oil rather than refined vegetable oils, including soybean, corn, or sunflower oil. These industrial seed oils, when heated, produce oxidized lipid compounds that promote the inflammation underlying insulin resistance. Finish the plate with a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil. The polyphenols in quality olive oil have direct anti-inflammatory effects and have been shown in multiple studies to improve insulin sensitivity. The metabolic profile of this breakfast is precisely what a diabetic morning requires. Very low glycemic impact, high satiety lasting 4 to 6 hours without hunger or energy crashes, nutrient density that directly addresses several deficiencies common in people with type 2 diabetes, and zero contribution to the morning insulin surge that locks the metabolism into fat storage mode. The second breakfast strategy is the fiber matrix approach, designed for those who want the comfort and texture of a spoon-eaten breakfast without the blood sugar consequences of oatmeal or cereal. The foundational ingredient is chia seeds, and the specific property of chia that makes it so clinically useful for blood sugar management is what happens when it is hydrated. Chia seeds contain a soluble fiber called mucilage. When hydrated, this fiber forms a viscous gel. When that gel enters your digestive system, it creates a physical barrier along the walls of your stomach and small intestine. Any glucose or starch present in your food has to penetrate this gel matrix before it can contact the absorptive surface of your intestine. The physical barrier slows glucose absorption dramatically, converting what would otherwise be a rapid glucose surge into a slow, gradual entry of glucose into the bloodstream. The preparation could not be simpler. 2 to 3 tablespoons of chia seeds mixed with full-fat unsweetened coconut milk or unsweetened almond milk the night before. The fiber matrix forms overnight in the refrigerator while you sleep. In the morning, you have a thick, creamy pudding that requires 0 preparation time. The critical detail is the word unsweetened. Sweetened plant milks contain added sugar that directly defeats the purpose. Full-fat coconut milk is preferable because the medium-chain triglycerides it contains are processed by the liver for rapid energy without requiring insulin, and the fat content contributes meaningfully to satiety and to the gastric slowing that further moderates glucose absorption. Add a small portion of berries, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, or blackberries. These fruits have the lowest glycemic index among common fruits because their sugar content is moderate and their fiber and antioxidant content is high. The polyphenols in berries, particularly anthocyanins, have been shown to directly inhibit the intestinal enzymes that break down starch into glucose, producing a further reduction in post-meal blood sugar response. Add a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon. This is not a cosmetic addition. Ceylon cinnamon contains compounds that have been shown in multiple studies to improve insulin receptor sensitivity and to inhibit alpha glucosidase, the intestinal enzyme responsible for breaking down complex carbohydrates into absorbable glucose. Ceylon cinnamon is not the same as cassia cinnamon, which is the most common variety sold in standard supermarkets. Cassia contains higher levels of coumarin, which can be problematic for liver function in regular quantities. Look specifically for Ceylon cinnamon. The result is a breakfast with the texture and eating experience of a comforting bowl of cereal or yogurt, a genuinely pleasant and satisfying meal, but with a metabolic profile that is completely different. The chia fiber slows glucose entry. The fat provides sustained satiety. The berries deliver antioxidants that reduce post-meal inflammation. The cinnamon improves insulin receptor function. Together, these components create a breakfast that works with your morning physiology rather than against it. The third breakfast strategy is the savory anti-inflammatory approach, and it is the most unconventional of the three. It is also, in terms of its effect on both immediate blood sugar and the underlying drivers of insulin resistance, the most powerful. The premise requires releasing a cultural assumption that most people have never consciously examined. The idea that breakfast must be sweet or must be structured around grain-based foods is not a biological requirement. It is a cultural convention that was heavily reinforced by decades of food industry marketing. There is no physiological reason your first meal of the day cannot be savory, protein-centered, and built around foods that would feel more comfortable at lunch or dinner. The specific recommendation here is bone broth paired with a quality protein source. Bone broth made from simmering animal bones for an extended period, 12 hours or longer for beef bones, releases collagen, gelatin, and specific amino acids, including glycine and glutamine, into the liquid. From a blood sugar standpoint, bone broth has virtually zero glycemic impact. It contains no carbohydrates. Its insulin response is negligible. For someone managing diabetes, starting the morning with bone broth produces the flattest possible glucose curve from the first meal of the day, but the clinical value goes deeper than the glycemic profile. A large and growing body of research has established that gut barrier integrity is directly relevant to systemic insulin resistance. When the tight junctions between intestinal epithelial cells are compromised, a condition called intestinal hyperpermeability, bacterial endotoxins and inflammatory molecules cross into systemic circulation and activate the chronic low-grade inflammatory state that is now recognized as a primary driver of insulin resistance at the cellular level. This is not a peripheral issue. Gut inflammation is a central mechanism of metabolic dysfunction. Glycine and glutamine, the amino acids most concentrated in bone broth, are the primary substrates used by intestinal epithelial cells to repair and maintain the tight junctions of the gut barrier. Regular consumption of bone broth directly supports the structural integrity of this barrier, reducing the endotoxin exposure that drives systemic inflammation and insulin resistance. You are not just eating a zero glycemic breakfast. You are actively addressing one of the root causes of the metabolic dysfunction underlying your diabetes. Pair the broth with a substantial protein source. Sardines are nutritionally exceptional for this purpose. They are among the richest dietary sources of EPA and DHA, the marine omega-3 fatty acids that have been shown across multiple randomized controlled trials to reduce H-hepatic fat accumulation, lower triglycerides, reduce systemic inflammation, and improve insulin signaling in peripheral tissues. The magnitude of omega-3 deficiency in people with type 2 diabetes and its relationship to inflammatory disease progression is substantially underappreciated in standard clinical practice. If sardines are outside your comfort zone, a portion of salmon, a piece of chicken, or eggs prepared differently are all appropriate protein pairings. The glycemic impact of this breakfast is zero. The inflammatory impact is actively negative, meaning it reduces inflammation rather than contributing to it. And the sustained satiety from the protein and fat content means you will reach your next meal without the hunger, irritability, and craving cycles that follow a carbohydrate-heavy breakfast. Let me bring everything together for you now. Your morning is your most metabolically vulnerable window. The dawn phenomenon has already elevated your blood sugar before you eat. Cortisol has already reduced your insulin sensitivity. A carbohydrate-heavy breakfast in this environment produces an aggressive glucose spike, a large insulin response, a mid-morning crash, and a hormonal state that prevents fat oxidation and drives progressive insulin resistance. The intelligent alternative is a breakfast that provides real nourishment and genuine satiety while producing minimal insulin response and working with your morning hormonal environment. The Protein and Fat Foundation, whole eggs with avocado cooked in stable fats, delivers complete nutrition with negligible glycemic impact and sustains satiety for 4 to 6 hours. The Fiber Matrix approach, chia pudding with full-fat coconut milk, berries, and Ceylon cinnamon, provides a satisfying, comforting breakfast with a physical fiber barrier that slows glucose absorption and compounds the benefit through anti-inflammatory polyphenols and insulin-sensitizing cinnamon compounds. And the savory anti-inflammatory breakfast, bone broth with a quality protein source, eliminates glycemic impact entirely while directly addressing the gut barrier, dysfunction, and systemic inflammation underlying insulin resistance. You do not need to implement all three simultaneously. Choose one that feels genuinely accessible for your current routine and start there. Consistency with one strategy will always outperform occasional attempts at all three. Your blood sugar numbers will tell you within days whether the approach is working. And for most people who make this shift consistently, the morning numbers begin responding faster than they expect. Your body is not broken. Your pancreas is not beyond help. Your blood sugar has been responding predictably to inputs that were never appropriate for your metabolic situation. Change the inputs consistently and specifically, and the response follows. I am Dr. William Kim. If this gave you a framework that changes how you approach your mornings, subscribe and share this with someone who has been following the standard diabetic breakfast advice without understanding why it is not working. I will see you in the next.